Hey everybody, I'm DJ Sixsmith. You're watching The Sit Down. Natalie Wood, What Remains Behind, a brand new documentary. Laurent Bouzereau Natasha Gregson Wagner. How are you guys doing today?
Doing great. Thank you so much for having us.
Yes, nice to meet you. Nice to see you.
It's good to be doing this. I know it's a little weird with the whole virtual world, but I'm really happy we're talking right now. And I'm really happy that people get to learn about Natalie Wood because I feel like a whole new generation will get to learn about her story. So Natasha, why don't we start with you? I mean, this is your mom. This is a really personal story for you. What was it like going through old footage and, doing this whole story?
It was incredibly cathartic, I would say, to discover the footage and rediscover photos, go through her journals and some of her writings. It just really corroborated the childhood that I remember, I would say.
Laurent, you've told many different stories before, and obviously this is a fascinating world to jump into. What was it like bringing life to some old black and white footage, and what was most intriguing about Natalie Wood to you?
Well, the thing that was most intriguing to me was a journey of discovery for myself. As a filmmaker, you always want to have a discovery, a journey, so that, that's part of the fun of making a documentary. And I didn't know, for example, that Natalie Wood was an actor with so much power that she could choose her own films, her own co-stars, her own directors. And so once I knew that and I started watching her films again in preparation for the film, I just realized that all of her movies were kind of autobiographical. It told so much about herself, but also about things she cared about. So that was something that really informed me in structuring the documentary and using her films, not so much in chronological order, but as, in a way, entering her world thematically and see how the film spoke so much about who she was and what she stood for.
Yeah, I think the power that she had was one of the most incredible things, especially at that time. And I feel like old Hollywood is really fascinating to look back on. So for both of you, when you think about old Hollywood, what kind of pops out at you immediately when you think back to that time?
Well, I think for me, by virtue of the fact that my parents were sort of a part of that time, a lot of those people, spent a lot of time at our house growing up. So I think I saw some of these greats in their most relaxed states, and what I remember about them was just their humanity, their joy, their sense of humor, their vitality and lust for living. And I think you see that in their performances on screen as well.
Yeah, Laurent, what was it like talking with some of these people like Robert Redford and Mia Farrow? What did you learn in these conversations?
Well, I mean, it was pretty amazing talking to them because they provided a perspective on Natalie Wood that I didn't necessarily expect. Like, I didn't know that, she had pretty much given Robert Redford, his big screen start. And I didn't know that Natalie Wood and Mia Farrow were pen pals and friends. And so that really provided a very interesting window into her. But,
Can you be a little quiet, honey? Sorry.
I don't see Natalie Wood necessarily as old Hollywood. And that's one thing that I'd like to add is that, we lost her, way too soon. But as she was growing herself as an artist, she was embracing new directors like Sidney Pollack and Paul Mazursky, people who were just, at the beginning of a new revolution in cinema, and even her last movie, Brainstorm, that she did with Douglas Trumbull, who was and still is arguably one of the great visionaries of movie making. So she was growing with the industry and actually, looking at all of her trajectory, you get a real lesson in transitional times in Hollywood, how it was old Hollywood and became the new Hollywood. And it's kind of fantastic to see that because very few actors of her generations were able to do it.
I think that's one of the coolest parts of her story. And in a lot of different ways, she was ahead of her time. So Natasha, when you think about your mom, like what allowed her to get to that point where she was thinking about directors who were going to be a part of the next wave, or like even being vulnerable enough to like, you know, write about her feelings and her marriage and her life, like, where do you think that all came from?
Well, that's very much the woman that I remember, the mother that I remember, you know, somebody who had, I mean, she wielded all the power in our household. You know, she made the rules, she set the schedule. Everybody had to check in with her. She was the boss lady. And, but within that, she was, you know, so strong, but vulnerable and warm and accessible. And, you know, all her writings, she was so articulate, and she was always asking me, Natushi, how do you feel about this? How do you feel about that? I want to explain this to you. You know, very much sensitive and checking in on my feelings, or, you know, calibrating emotions. And she was just so good at that. So none of this is a surprise to me. I mean, that's sort of how I remember her, but I'm just incredibly grateful that the world is now going to know about her in this way, you know, because she was such a force. I mean, she was a true supernova.
No question about it. Laurent, for you, what was it like watching Natasha talking to her father or talking to other people who interacted with her mother? What was the coolest part of that for you?
Well, you know, we had such a close relationship, Natasha and I, through the process, and we prepared all the interviews together. And we decided right off the bat that that interview with Robert Wagner was going to be done by Natasha in that context, because there are elements of it that are very polarizing, and I just felt, you know, I want that particular interview to stand out, and so Natasha courageously took on, you know, doing it. We prepared it together. I was obviously right there with my team, and RJ was also very, very courageous and very generous in during those 2 days during which we shot that. And for the other interviews, you know, it was important for Natasha that this felt very objective. And so I conducted the other interviews, but she was always at my side to interject if there were other stories that she knew of. And so it was a real collaboration, but I think that it was very important that to Natasha and the family at large, really, that there was some real integrity with this, and that there was a point of view of a filmmaker that, was bold enough to go to certain places where sometimes it's more difficult for a family member to ask certain questions, you know, naturally.
Yeah,
So it was really a great collaboration, and a real journey for me. You know, I just want to mention that since we filmed this documentary, you know, we've lost Richard Gregson, who is Natasha's dad, and Mark Crowley, who was arguably Natalie's closest friend, and she gave him the tools and the chance to write and to do Boys in the Band, which, as you know, is still pretty much alive out there. And so it's pretty amazing to know that already this documentary feels like a document that could not be reproduced today by virtue of two of the most important people in her life, you know, aside from her kids and RJ, are no longer with us already.
Yeah, that's one of the bummers of the documentary process, and one of the beautiful parts of it as well is that this can live on. And, you know, one of the things that I was thinking about, guys, is just narratives, because like with the Natalie Wood story, it's like there was so much great stuff that she produced, that she did, and we obviously have focused on the end of that story. So Natasha, for you, why was now the right time to do this? You know, is this something you'd always thought about in terms of telling your mom's story? And what's it like for you to be able to say, hey, like this happened, but like there's much more to this story that I think we should all talk about?
I think for me, you know, becoming a mom myself was a huge impetus. I didn't know that I was going to make the documentary until a few years ago. I mean, I knew that her story was essential and should be told, but I think I wouldn't have had the confidence until I met Laurent and we actually started to put our heads together and talk about it. I was also working on a book that is coming out on the same day as the documentary. So I was sort of steeping myself in my mom's life and in my relationship with her. And I just feel that, you know, some of there's been a lot of misinformation out there. And I felt like the ship was sort of veering towards an iceberg, and I needed to take control of the ship and guide it to safer land and more honest land. So that's what I'm hoping that this documentary will do. You know, will really clarify and clear up a lot of the misinformation that's out there.
Laurent, I think we've hit on a lot of really important things in this conversation. What is the most important thing to know about Natalie Wood when you check out this documentary?
Wow. The most important thing for me is really that she was a woman of our time. And there's so much to learn from her still today and to be inspired from. So anyone interested in a really powerful story of a inspiring woman, you know, will find something in there to be inspired by.
Beautifully said. Laurent, Natasha, thank you very much. May 5th is the big day on HBO.
Yeah.
That's it.
All right.
Thank
Awesome.
you, DJ.
Well, guys, thanks so much. And we'll talk to you down the road. All right.
Thank you. Fantastic
Sounds
question.
good.
Thank you.
Bye.